Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to 19th century U.S. history here, and this week we will be digging into late century expansion, how the U.S. in the latter half of the 1800s is, expanding territory, getting in on the imperialism game that had been going on for quite a long time on the European side of things. But in addition to that, this week and in the coming couple of weeks here, we don't have much as far as assignments due. Not nothing that's focused outside of the larger semester projects. So uh, for your part, the primary goal here, other than just working through the class material and listening and watching to a few of the videos that we post here along with the class videos, is focusing on those assignment, the larger semester project that you have going on. So if you haven't had a chance to check out the announcement video that I put up about searching newspapers for your articles, check that out. If you're running into any problems, please do get in touch with me so that we can work through those now, whether that involves talking to the librarians that are available online or whatever we need to do, just so that you're not pushing up against the very last week getting everything done. That's always frustrating and stressful, and it'd be better to avoid that right now. And without dedicated sitting in class time, hopefully you're able to be flexible enough to make that work. So pay attention to that. Be working on it, as even a few hours here and there will make a big dent in what you need to do here at the end of the semester. So without further ado, we'll jump in here and get on with a bit on the late century expansion of the United States. Okay, so just a slight recap. What we're trying to get into here is that the 1800s have seen a massive transformation for the United States. So in 1800, the vast majority of the United States is rural. They're agrarian. They live in a world that is slow and very little is connected to the outside world. By the end of the century, the United States is significantly more urban industrial. It is significantly more connected to the goings on in the world, the global economy. Everything is much more intertwined. And so, in a span of 100 years, that's a really massive transformation. The changes are significant in that the United States has gone from being a very new nation. So just in the latter part of the 1700s, the country got established. By 1812, we're still fighting the British over over those same conflicts. So we had the second round with the British there in 1812, and the economy expanded and was doing okay. And then we had the middle of the century Civil War period that broke everything and slowed progress down. And then after that, U.S. is able to get back on its feet again and start modernizing as a nation and starting to become a world nation rather than just an isolated place. So for much of the 1800s, the policy had been isolation, had been we don't want anything to do with European affairs or to do with other most of the things that other nations were interested in. Avoiding conflicts with European powers was a major policy of the U.S. going forward, and it's going to change by the end of the century. By the end of the century, the U.S. is going to be getting more into European affairs and is going to be getting more and more so on the world stage, and is going to be pushing its boundaries and looking for new territory to swallow up to a certain extent. It's going to be due to growing economic interest and just wanting to get in on the game to a certain extent, because everything that had been pushing forward from the 1400s onward had been focused on European imperialism as far as European powers were concerned. And so the U.S. is very, very late to that game, and it's going to show in the random assortment of territories that it's able to pick up here toward the end of the century. But there are a non-zero number of people in the United States that are going to be pushing for annexation of various territories. They think that this is the path to power, that the U.S. needs more territories to create more markets, which is what the Europeans had done, especially the British with India. India had become a major market for the goods that had been produced in Britain. So this had been the norm. The norm for Europeans had been imperialism. It was in full force. By the late 1800s, the Europeans had fully divided up Africa. They had heavily become involved in Asia. So you can see over in this side here. Oh, there it is. It expanded a bit. So obviously, all of the major green territories here are the British Empire. So they would say the sun never set on the British Empire. So all through Africa, over to Canada, all through India and Southeast Asia, and then over through here through Australia, New Zealand, and then wraps around the world. So literally an around the world empire there. And so these European powers, they had seized territories, established colonies. They pushed for economic expansion, exploitation in some cases, depending on what worked best for them. They had established systems of racial superiority over native peoples in that area. And often, Christianity was pushed in most cases. And in most cases of this, all of this was focused on, heavily on economics, sometimes on military, but it was heavily competition-based, heavily trade-based, access to raw materials, access to markets. Those are the two areas that tend to be the way people focused. And it also produced a lot of odd results. There's a reason that in the UK, in England and places in that UK, the primary takeout food is curry. That's their national dish when you go out for a quick bite for them. It's not, it may be fish and chips for some of the time, but a vast majority of people will go out for a quick curry. And that's a really odd thing. But the reason for that is that so many Indians made their way to the UK through that relationship that they formed in the colonial period, and that was the result. In India, a major sport is cricket. That was an import from the UK to India, and an oddity of that relationship, but still important to this day. Cricket across the British, either current Commonwealth or former British colonies, is still a major game and is played internationally, nationally and internationally. So, leftovers of colonialism. Another odd example is Vietnam. There's a sandwich, the banh mi sandwich, which is a French baguette paired with Asian ingredients, meats and vegetables, and it's a wonderful thing. But it's a artifact of the colonial era because if you look in the purpley parts, which aren't that many because France didn't have that massive, outside of Africa, that massive of a presence around the world, right there you see, I believe at the time it was French Indochina was the term used, but Vietnam for our purposes. And that is a result. One odd result of it was the merging of foods. And there's also different levels of control that develop, and you'll see that with the U.S. as well. As the U.S. expands territorially, there's going to be different forms of control that develop. So, some are more economic control, as it was in India. Some are more military control, as you saw in various African countries. Some are just colonial power. Actual people being sent there to colonize, which was more the case in Australia for the British, or in other places. So it really, really varied, and you'll see the same thing with how things change for the U.S. as well. But the rationalizations tend to be focused on superiority, either racial superiority in some cases, or just cultural superiority is more the case a lot of times. The promoting of various English style institutions in India, or economic systems in a lot of cases are that form, or religious systems. Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, tends to be supported in a lot of cases, as was Catholicism maybe a number of years or centuries before that, when Spain was the major colonial power. So just a quick summation there of what's going on here. And so the U.S. expansion in general comes out of growing ambitions. They want to, as the century is continuing, the U.S. wants to join in. They had established the Monroe Doctrine to prevent European powers from further encroaching on the Americas, but that doesn't mean that the United States is uninterested in gaining power in other places. And so they're going to be looking around and going, where could we add to our either economic strength or maybe military locations? They're kind of looking for both of those. And so that's why, especially in Asia, they're going to be looking in that direction. And the general public is going to be becoming more aware. The newspapers are going to be able to stir up sentiment that, oh, well, the U.S. should join in this particular case, or that this is a cause that the U.S. should join. So you'll see that coming up as well. Some people disagree over whether this is right. Some people are going to be saying that this isn't something the U.S. should be involved in because it came out of the desire for freedom, and so why would we want to be a colonial power when that was something that we threw off? That's going to be a sort of complex question. So the number of people who are like cheerleaders for expansionism are few, but they are quite vocal and will have sort of an outsized amount of power and attention for the number that they actually are. But one area that the U.S. is going to be growing in strength in is naval power. A succession of late century presidencies are going to be focused on the number of battleships, especially steel battleships, as the steel industry is growing rapidly, expanding the size of the U.S. Navy to, as the British century is waning, growing the U.S. strength. And that's going to lead to the U.S. having that ability to expand itself. So that's important there as well. And so I think I'll pause there, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about a couple of specific expansions as the U.S. is getting into this game.